The morning sun barely penetrated the dense Virginia humidity that hung over the naval amphibious base Little Creek. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of another sweltering day, as over 200 sailors and newly minted special warfare candidates stood at rigid attention on the sprawling asphalt grinder. They were the future of naval special warfare, the best of the best, the ones who had survived the initial cuts. But to the man pacing before them like a caged panther, they were just soft bodies in need of hardening. Commander Marcus Thorne, a Navy SEAL colonel with 22 years of service and more combat deployments than most men had years in the military, was a living legend. His chest was a roadmap of valor, adorned with 2 silver stars and a bronze star with a V for valor, each medal representing a moment of sheer, unadulterated courage. His face, weathered by sun, wind, and the unyielding passage of time, was set in a permanent scowl of disappointment as he surveyed the formation. The candidates, men and a sprinkling of women who had made it through the initial assessment, stood frozen, their eyes locked on a point 1,000 yards in the distance, none daring to meet his gaze. They knew what was coming. They had all heard the rumors about the commander's physical training sessions, or as the veterans called them, the crucible talks. Thorne stopped pacing and planted his feet, his voice erupting like a clap of thunder across the silent grinder. "Look at you," he began, his voice laced with a venomous contempt that made the bravest candidates flinch. "Standing there in your crisp uniforms, all that untapped potential just radiating off you like heat waves." He began to walk slowly down the line of sweating, terrified faces. "I see you in the chow hall. I see you in the classrooms. I see you running around the track with your little energy drinks and your protein bars." He stopped in front of a young man who was visibly trembling. "And I hear you," Thorne hissed, his face inches from the candidates. "I hear the excuses. My alarm didn't go off. My gear didn't fit right. I didn't get enough sleep. My legs are sore." He spat on the ground. "Spare me the excuses." Thorne spun on his heel and addressed the entire assembly, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "You know what I did this morning? I woke up at 0300. Not because I had to, but because that's what the human body is designed to do. Yeah, I ran 8 miles with a 40-pound ruck on my back. My knees are bone on bone from decades of jumping out of perfect airplanes. My left shoulder has more metal in it than a Ford F-150. I have shrapnel in places you don't even want to know about." He pounded his fist against his chest. "But you don't see me standing here making excuses, do you? You don't see me asking for a participation trophy." He walked back to the center of the grinder, his eyes sweeping over them with disdain. "The problem with your generation is that you think the world owes you something. You think that just showing up is half the battle. Let me tell you something. Showing up is the bare minimum. Showing up is what you do when you're a quitter who hasn't quit yet. I need warriors. I need killers. I need men and women who are going to run through a wall for the guy next to them, not cry to their shrink because someone hurt their feelings." The speech was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, designed to strip them down to their rawest emotions. He wanted them angry. He wanted them indignant. He wanted them to prove him wrong. He went on, detailing the grueling history of the SEAL teams. The men who had come before them, who had suffered through hellish training in the swamps of Vietnam and the deserts of Iraq without the benefit of modern sports medicine or high-tech fabrics. He contrasted their perceived softness with the granite-like resilience of the warriors he had served with, men who had lost limbs and returned to the battlefield, men who had taken bullets and kept fighting. "And now," he boomed, gesturing towards the small contingent of female candidates who stood rock still in the back row. "Now they want me to believe that women can do this job. They want me to believe that some of you have what it takes to be frogmen. Let's be honest with ourselves." The air grew even thicker, if that was possible. The other candidates shifted uncomfortably. "You want equality? Fine. then I'll hold you to the exact same standard. I don't care if you're a man, a woman, or anything in between. On my battlefield, the enemy doesn't discriminate, and neither do I. But I look at you, and I don't see it. I see hesitation. I see doubt. I see people looking for a way out. I see people who are going to wash out the second things get tough. He was just getting warmed up, his voice reaching a crescendo of contempt, and when he saw a slight movement in the ranks. It was a woman, a candidate named Maya. She wasn't tall or particularly imposing physically, but there was something in the way she held herself, a stillness that was different from the rigid fear of the others. As Thorn continued his tirade against the weakness of the modern era, Maya's hand drifted, almost involuntarily, to her own left side. It was a fleeting gesture, a brief press of her palm against her hip, visible only to someone who was looking for weakness, for a tell. Thorn's eyes narrowed. He had spent his entire life reading people, analyzing threats, and spotting the one person in a crowd who was about to snap. He saw Maya's movement and misinterpreted it. He saw it as defiance, as an inability to stand still and take the medicine he was dishing out. He saw it as confirmation of his own bias. He stalked towards her, his boots heavy on the asphalt, the entire formation holding its collective breath. He stopped directly in front of her, towering over her. "Is there a problem, candidate?" he snarled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do my words offend your delicate sensibilities? Do you need a moment? A glass of water? Maybe a hug?" A few of the male candidates snickered nervously. Maya didn't flinch. She kept her eyes forward, staring at a point just past his left shoulder. Her jaw was tight. "I asked you a question, sailor," Thorn roared. "When a senior officer addresses you, you look him in the eye." He was in her face now, his breath hot, his presence overwhelming. Slowly, Maya turned her head and met his gaze. Her eyes were not filled with fear or anger, and they were filled with a deep, profound sadness that momentarily caught the commander off guard. It was the look of someone who had seen things, who had been to a place he couldn't imagine. It was a look he recognized, because he had seen it in the mirror. "No, sir," she said, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "I don't need a moment. I just wanted you to know, sir. I already know." Thorn blinked, confused by her response. "You already know what, candidate? Spit it out." Maya's hand came up again, but this time it didn't press against her side. It hovered over the left side of her uniform blouse, just below her ribs. "I already know about the shrapnel, sir," she said, her voice unwavering. "I know what it's like to have it in you. I know what it's like to feel it shift when you move. To wonder if it's going to tear something vital if you push too hard. I know what it's like to ignore it." The silence that followed was deafening. Thorn stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He had been mid-stride in his verbal assault, and she had just tripped him. The other candidates were stunned. What was she talking about? How could she possibly know what shrapnel felt like? Thorn recovered quickly, his face hardening again. "Don't get cute with me, candidate. You're a trainee. You don't know anything about—" But Maya wasn't finished. She reached for the hem of her blouse. A murmur rippled through the formation. This was highly against protocol. You did not undress on the grinder without an order, but something in the commander's silence, his hesitation, gave her permission. She lifted the blouse just enough to reveal the skin at her waist. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Thorn's eyes, accustomed to scanning for threats, for anomalies, focused on the landscape of scar tissue that ran in a chaotic, brutal pattern across her lower abdomen and hip. These were not surgical scars, clean and precise. They were puckered, angry, star-shaped patterns of healed flesh, the unmistakable signature of a fragmentation wound. It was a wound pattern he knew intimately, because he carried a nearly identical one on his own body. The color drained from the commander's face, the bluster, the anger, the contempt. It all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a dawning, horrifying realization. He wasn't looking at a soft, untested candidate. He wasn't looking at someone who needed a pep talk or a kick in the pants. He was looking at a combat veteran, someone who had already been to the very hell he was preparing them for. And she bore the same gruesome badge of honor that he did. The room, the grinder, the world, it was all utterly silenced by the geography of her pain. The sight of those scars acted as a key, turning a lock in Commander Thorne's memory that he had kept sealed for years. He took an involuntary step back, his mind racing. The scar pattern was specific, the result of a particular type of low-velocity fragmentation, the kind that came from a close-range detonation. It was a signature, and he had seen it before. Maya, seeing the shift in his eyes, made a decision. She knew she had crossed a line, but she also knew that the truth, once started, could not be stopped. She had been carrying this secret, waiting for the right moment, or perhaps dreading it. Now it seemed the moment had chosen her. "I wasn't going to bring this up, sir," she said, her voice low enough that only he and the candidates nearest to them could hear. "That wasn't why I came here. I came here to prove myself, just like everyone else. But your speech, sir, it got to me. You talked about the warriors you served with, the ones who lost limbs and kept fighting. You talked about your own injuries like they were medals." She took a deep breath. "Well, I earned these scars in a place you know very well, sir. The Korengal Valley, 2019. Thorne felt the air leave his lungs. The Korengal. It was a name that haunted the dreams of every soldier and SEAL who had served in Afghanistan. It was the Valley of Death, a jagged, an unforgiving gash in the Hindu Kush where the U.S. military had fought some of the most brutal engagements of the entire war. He had been there. He had lost men there. His own shrapnel wounds were from a firefight in a nearby village, a chaotic night ambush that had left 3 of his teammates dead. "That was a bad year," Thorne whispered more to himself than to her. Maya nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I was a combat engineer attached to an army unit. We were clearing routes looking for IEDs. My job was to walk point with the metal detector." She paused, the memory washing over her. "We were moving through a village, providing overwatch for a SEAL team that was going after a high-value target. The team was... They were from this command, sir. Team 7. Thorne's blood ran cold. Team 7. His team. His old platoon. And the memories came flooding back, the mission brief, the insertion, the chaos. "The Haqqani network leader," he breathed. "The raid on the compound near the eastern ridge." "That's the one," Maya confirmed. "We were the support element, holding the perimeter. The SEALs went in and all hell broke loose. We started taking fire from 3 different directions. Mortars, RPGs, small arms. It was a trap." She looked down at her scars. "The IED I found wasn't on the road. It was a pressure plate, hidden under a pile of debris near where I took cover. It wasn't a big one, just a small daisy chain charge, but it was enough. It sent a spray of rusty metal fragments right into my side." Thorne's mind was piecing it together. He remembered the chaos of that night, the frantic radio calls. He remembered the support element taking casualties. Then he remembered hearing about an engineer who had been hit by shrapnel, a young soldier who had kept providing covering fire even after being wounded, refusing to be evacuated until the SEAL team was clear. He had never known the name. He had only known the act. "I bled a lot," Maya continued, her voice detached, clinical, as if she were discussing the weather. "The corpsman who patched me up said I was lucky. An inch to the left and it would have nicked my kidney. An inch to the right and it would have hit my spine. Instead, I'd just got a handful of metal souvenirs and a ticket home." She finally broke eye contact, looking out at the distant tree line. "They gave me a Purple Heart and a medical discharge. Told me my fighting days were over." She looked back at Thorne, and now he saw the fire in her eyes. and the same fire he saw in his own reflection every morning. But they were wrong. I spent 3 years in physical therapy, learning to walk without a limp, learning to run, learning to lift. I had 2 surgeries to remove the fragments that were too close to my organs. But the rest are still in there. And every time I push myself, every time I run, every time I do a sit-up, I feel them. They remind me of why I joined in the first place. They remind me that I'm not done. I re-enlisted, fought my way back to active duty, and then I fought my way here, to the teams, to finish the job I started that night. The confession hung in the air, heavy and profound. The candidates around them, who had been straining to hear, now understood the magnitude of what was unfolding. They were witnessing a collision of 2 worlds. 2 warriors who had been forged in the same fire, meeting on a grinder in Virginia. Thorne was silent for a long moment. His mind replayed his own speech, every arrogant, dismissive word he had spoken about weakness and excuses and the modern generation. He had stood there, wrapped in the armor of his own legend, and he had metaphorically slapped a woman who had already walked through a hell he knew intimately. She hadn't just survived a combat zone, she had survived the aftermath, the long, lonely battle to reclaim her body and her purpose. She had taken shrapnel covering his team, his brothers, and he had just told her she probably couldn't hack it. He looked at the scars again, and this time he didn't see a medical oddity. He saw a map of her courage. He saw the evidence of a sacrifice he had unknowingly benefited from. He looked at her face, and he didn't see a candidate. He saw a fellow combat veteran, a survivor, a warrior. The silence on the grinder was absolute. 200 people stood frozen, watching the legendary commander, the man who never showed weakness, the man who lived and breathed stoic aggression, grapple with a truth he had never considered. He had built his identity on his physical sacrifices, on the shrapnel in his body. And now he was standing in front of a woman who had the exact same credentials, who had earned them in the exact same way, and he had just dismissed her as unworthy. Thorne looked away from Maya, his eyes scanning the faces of the other candidates. He saw them differently now. They weren't just soft bodies. They were individuals with stories, with pasts. With invisible burdens they carried just as surely as he carried his metal. He had spent so long using his own pain as a weapon to bludgeon others, he had forgotten that pain was the one thing every single person in uniform shared. He opened his mouth to speak, but for the first time in his adult life, Commander Marcus Thorne, Navy SEAL, was completely speechless. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to apologize for a lifetime of arrogance. So, he did the only thing that felt authentic. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then, slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his brow and rendered a sharp, perfect salute to candidate Maya. It wasn't a salute to a subordinate. It was a salute to an equal. It was a salute to a fellow warrior. Maya, her eyes glistening but her spine straight as a ramrod, it returned the salute with equal precision. For a full 10 seconds, they stood frozen in that tableau of mutual respect, a bridge built across the chasm of rank, gender, and prejudice by the universal language of sacrifice. Thorne finally dropped his hand and cleared his throat. He turned to face the entire formation. His voice, when it came, was different. The aggressive bark was gone, replaced by a gravelly rasp of humility. "All right, listen up," he said. "I was wrong." The words seemed to cause him physical pain, but he forced them out. "I gave you a speech about excuses and weakness, and I used candidate Maya here as an example of everything I thought was wrong with you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see. And was that standing in front of me was a combat veteran who took shrapnel covering a SEAL team in the Korengal. She bled for her country, fought her way back from a medical discharge, and is standing here today trying to do it all over again. She has more metal in her side than I have in my shoulder, and she didn't say a word about it. She just stood there and took my verbal abuse. He looked back at Maya. That, right there, he said, pointing at her, is what a warrior looks like. It's not about how loud you yell. It's not about how many push-ups you can do. It's about what you do when you get knocked down. It's about getting back up, even when your body is full of holes, and saying, "I'm not done yet." He looked at the rest of the candidates. "I owe you all an apology. I judged you before I knew you. I let my own biases cloud my vision. From now on, this training will be hard. It will push you to your limits and beyond. But I will never again stand here and question your right to be here based on how you look or where you come from. You will prove yourselves through your actions, not through my preconceptions. That's a promise." He turned back to Maya. "Candidate, front and center." Maya stepped forward, her heart pounding. Thorne looked at her, a new respect gleaming in his hard eyes. "I don't know the regulations on this, and I frankly don't care. You will be the platoon guide for this class. You will lead these candidates. You will show them what resilience looks like. And when you graduate, and you will graduate, I expect to see your name at the top of the honor roll. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Maya said, and her voice strong and clear. "Thank you, sir." The rest of the PT session was a blur of activity. Thorne led them through a brutal workout, but his demeanor had changed. He was still demanding, still pushing them to their absolute limits, but the contempt was gone. He coached, he corrected, he even offered a word of encouragement here and there. The candidates, for their part, responded with a new level of intensity. Maya, now leading them, moved with a quiet authority that inspired those around her. The shrapnel in her side ached with every movement, but she embraced the pain. It was a reminder that she was alive, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of that morning on the grinder spread through the training command. Commander Thorne, the living legend, he had been humbled by a candidate. He had apologized. He had changed. It became a legend in its own right, a story told to every new class that arrived at Little Creek. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, the power of resilience, and the undeniable truth that the warrior spirit knows no gender. As for Maya, she excelled. The appointment as platoon guide was not just a symbolic gesture. She proved to be an exceptional leader, firm but fair, demanding but empathetic. She understood the struggles of the candidates because she had struggled herself. She had been to the brink and back. She could spot the difference between a candidate who was simply tired and one who was truly broken, and she knew how to push the former and salvage the latter. And the male candidates who had initially snickered at Commander Thorne's harsh words about women now looked at Maya with a profound respect. They had seen her scars. They had heard her story. They knew that she had already been in more firefights than most of them would ever see. She became a mentor, a big sister figure to many, helping them through the dark moments of doubt and exhaustion that plagued Hell Week and the other brutal phases of training. Commander Thorne, for his part, underwent his own transformation. The experience had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront prejudices he didn't even know he harbored. He started spending more time with the candidates, not just yelling at them from a distance, but talking to them, learning their stories. He realized that every single one of them had a reason for being there. It was a personal battle they were fighting. Some were escaping poverty. Some were carrying on a family tradition. Some, like Maya, were seeking redemption. His job, he realized, wasn't to break them down with contempt, but to forge them into a unit with fire and purpose. He incorporated Maya's story into his future lectures, not as a tale of his own humility, but as an example of the quiet, unassuming courage that existed in the ranks. "You don't know who you're standing next to," he would tell new classes. "You don't know what they've been through. That quiet kid in the back might have already done things you can't imagine. Your job is not to judge them. Your job is to earn the right to stand beside them, to become worthy of their trust. yet to become a teammate they can count on when the bullets start flying. The climax of this shared journey came on graduation day. The sun was bright over the same grinder where Maya had first faced Commander Thorne's wrath. The candidates, now lean, hardened, and confident, stood in perfect formation. Families and friends filled the bleachers, cameras flashing. Among them was Maya's mother, her eyes wet with tears of pride. Commander Thorne stood at the podium, resplendent in his dress whites, his chest full of medals. He called the graduates forward one by one to receive their pins, the golden trident of the Navy SEALs. As each name was called, he shook their hand and offered a quiet word of congratulations. Then he called Maya's name. She stepped forward, her posture perfect, her face glowing with an inner light. As she approached, Thorne stepped away from the podium and walked towards her. Instead of shaking her hand, he stopped, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. He opened it and tipped the contents into his palm. It was a small, jagged piece of shrapnel, no bigger than a thumbnail. The metal was dark, almost black with age. "I've carried this with me for over a decade," Thorne said, his voice low, meant only for her. "It's a piece of the shrapnel they took out of my shoulder after that firefight in the village near the Korengal. It's been my reminder of why I fight, of the men I lost, of the price of this life." He looked at her, his eyes shining with an emotion he rarely showed. "But I realized something over these past months. That night, while I was focused on my own mission, my own team, you were out there on the perimeter, and taking the same risks, bleeding the same blood. That shrapnel in your side, it's connected to this piece of metal in my hand. We're linked, you and I, by that valley, by that fight." He pressed the small piece of shrapnel into her palm and closed her fingers around it. "I want you to have this," he said, "not as a souvenir, but as a symbol that our sacrifices, all of our sacrifices, are connected. A symbol that the old guard and the new guard are forged from the same steel. You've proven that beyond any doubt." Maya looked at the piece of metal in her hand, then back at Commander Thorne. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She didn't care who saw. She clutched the shrapnel tightly, feeling its weight, its history. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I'll carry it with me, always." Thorne nodded. I stepped back and rendered a sharp salute. "Senior Chief Maya," he announced, his voice booming across the grinder for all to hear. The crowd erupted in applause. As Maya walked back to her place in the formation, the silver trident now pinned to her chest and the piece of shrapnel clutched tightly in her hand, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had come full circle. The wounds that had once threatened to end her career had become the foundation of her new life. The man who had once dismissed her had become her greatest mentor. She looked out at the families in the bleachers, at her beaming mother, at the sailors standing at attention, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was home. Commander Thorne watched her go, a rare smile touching his lips. He had spent his career building warriors, but Maya had taught him what it truly meant to be one. It wasn't about the metal in your body or the medals on your chest. It was about the size of the heart that kept you going, the strength of the spirit that refused to quit, and the quiet, unshakable courage to stand up again and again, no matter how many times life knocked you down. He turned back to the podium, ready to call the next name, his own heart a little lighter, his own spirit a little wiser, forever changed by the woman who had silenced a room with her scars and taught a living legend the true meaning of valor.